Hi, we're going to talk about starting a conversation. At this point in the program, there are a number of skills that have been worked on, and starting a conversation in many ways is a number of skills put together to have a particular outcome. So, with starting a conversation, we have basically six or so steps that we teach the children. Of course, we always start off with saying hi, and when working with the children, if they in most cases know the other person's name, they will be coached to say hi with the person's name. As you look at this plan, you would see that step 2, 3, and 4 all consist of questions. And so we teach the children early on that when you engage in a conversation, a fair amount of the conversation will consist of questions. There's other components of the conversation, but at this stage we are really focusing on the fact that the question is, using a question is particularly in a conversation, one of the first things that you do when you get involved. How are you is pretty customary, and we teach the children that, of course, when someone says how are you, depending on who's asking, they may mean that to some degree, but it's also an extension of a hi or a greeting. So there is the how are you after the hi. And then the next question is basically an open-ended question. For example, what are you doing? It could be, how's it going? What are you up to? In this case, we use, what are you doing? And it's meant to allow their friend to answer in any way possible as to what's going on. The third question, step number 4, is an example of how you continue the question process. And in this case, what are you doing this weekend? But of course, if the weekend just passed, it could be, how was last weekend? If the kids are a little bit older and they come out of the classroom environment, it could be, how did you do on the exam? I mean, it doesn't really matter so much as to what the question is, but it's nice to start off with a string of questions when starting a conversation. Finally, you move into adding to this conversation by giving some information about yourself. I'm going to do this, or guess what? This is what happened. And how we're doing this is that we're using questions as a lead up to your child making a comment in the conversation. Now, later on, we'll talk about joining a conversation, which is different in some regard. Actually, in a few steps. With starting a conversation, your son or daughter actually has a little bit more control as to the topic of the conversation because they're starting it. They actually have control as to who they are picking to talk to as well. So there's a lot more control at times when you start a conversation versus joining a conversation. In this case, the child might have in mind an item, a topic under 5. For example, I'm going to see the newest superhero movie, and they already have that in mind, but they're not running up and saying, hi, I'm going to the newest superhero movie. There's a bit of a warm-up, and we talk about that when you ask the other person a question, you immediately are getting them involved in the conversation. The topic of this lesson is not, how do I tell my friend what I want to tell them, walking up to them and just start talking about my favorite topic. It's not called, how do I talk about my favorite topic? It's called starting a conversation. So that does involve getting the other person involved. That's another piece of why there's questions leading up to step number 5, the comment. Number 6, for some of the groups, they may or may not have had that lesson on social clue finding. For the current group that I'm making these videos for, they do not. So I'm going to skip it now, and it will be another video upcoming in a few more weeks as to how you use social clues to start conversations and maintain conversations. The last step here is to tell the truth. And the reason why that's there is because some of the children I've worked with over time, they were very eager and motivated to start a conversation. And in some cases, they've learned that one of perhaps the best ways to start a conversation is to have a fantastic story to tell. And in the beginning, that could actually work if the story is somewhat believable. And for younger children, it doesn't actually even have to be that believable. Some younger children, talking kindergarten, first grade, might just believe it anyways. If your father is just joined the Rangers hockey team, for example, some kids, younger kids, won't question that; they'll go with it. And so some kids early on learn to inappropriately use fantastic type of stories or information to increase their value, so that people would listen to them as they're starting their conversation. So that's why that last step there is just it's almost like a footnote, and we help the children understand that when you do start a conversation, or when you're in any conversation really, and a particular topic or subject comes up, that you might be motivated to embellish the story a little bit, but that in many cases that'll come back and mess things up for you. And we talk about how that can happen. So the first lesson I should say the first conversation skill that really embodies many different skills. If you notice also on the lesson plan, there is the 2-question rule symbol, and that's because we're also, of course, encouraging the children to, when they ask a question, to wait a few, just to be ready for the other person to ask them the same question back, and that could happen. But also, if we're working with a few children that have all had the 2-question rule, well, this will be an opportunity for them to practice that as well within when their friend comes over and tries to start a conversation with them. And so there is an exchange of information and dialogue. So that's it for starting a conversation. The next video will be about joining a conversation, and we'll talk about some more differences between the two. Thanks.